Good evening. Welcome to the Canby City Council regular meeting. We're actually reconvening because we had an earlier exec session and work session. So if you will stand, please, for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you please stay standing for a moment of silence, specifically for the slain officer in Oregon City, just to keep him and those officers, that city, and his family in your thoughts, please. All right. Thank you very much. As I said, we had a work session that just wrapped up just a little bit ago to discuss the city's landscaping ordinance and code pieces, and turned into a good conversation, so stay tuned probably for more from that. Before we move into communications, we have a walk-on kind of proclamation that's not in the agenda, and so I want to thank Kim for pulling this together and seeing this, but it's a proclamation. I'm honoring the fallen police reserve officer of Oregon City, Oregon, and supporting the city of Oregon City as it heals from this terrible tragedy. Whereas the city of Oregon City, Oregon, has suffered an unfathomable loss with the recent murder of its reserve police officer, Robert, Libke? And whereas fallen officer Robert Libke served the citizens of Oregon City as the most valuable public servant since 2009, and whereas law enforcement is an honorable, hardworking profession that diligently seeks to make our communities more livable, and whereas there is no greater sacrifice an officer can make for their community than to give their life, and whereas the murder of a police officer shocks the very soul of a community, our government, and the very freedoms the officers have sworn to protect, and whereas the impact of this tragedy upon the officer's family, friends, department, and community is immeasurable. Now, therefore, I, Brian Hodson, along with the City Council and the citizens of Canby, Oregon, extend heartfelt condolences to the City of Oregon City, Oregon, its staff, the officers' family, and its citizens. We mourn the loss of Oregon City's valuable public servant and pray for healing and hope in this time of need. Given unto my hand this 6th day of November, 2013.
Thanks for doing that, Mr. Mayor. That's appropriate.
Well, Kim gets the credit for passing it along, so thank you, Kim, for that. Communications.
I have none there.
Perfect. Perfect meaning just we can move along. I didn't want to listen to you talk. First opportunity for citizen input and community announcements. If you are so inclined and fill out a little yellow card and deliver it there to our city recorder, she'll make sure that you get recorded and you can tell us what's on your mind. The yellow cards I have are for an item on the agenda this evening, so we'll get to those. So if there is anybody that outside of that, okay. We'll move into mayor's business. Thank everyone. It's been 3 weeks since we've last been here, so it's a little, I think we get that twice a year. I think that happens for us.
Blue moon.
What's that?
It's like a blue moon.
Yeah, yeah. So a few things have gone on. I just want to thank Main Street manager and the committees for the Halloween downtown. I thought it was great. Great parade, great turnout. We had a great escort there by Lieutenant Tro and Officer making sure the trick-or-treaters were safe. And I want to thank the Kiwanians for the haunted maze and the haunted house that they put on. I heard it was a fantastic turnout, and people are excited for next year's already. I had the opportunity to attend a roundtable with County Chairman Ludlow, and much of that discussion was around a proposed transportation district for unincorporated Clackamas County, and we're planning on having these kind of meetings quarterly with the county chair, so stay tuned for that, and also stay tuned for the transportation district conversation. It sounds like it's bubbling up and getting pretty exciting, and I don't mean that in a good way, I don't think. Northwoods community will begin its phase 2 development, and there was a neighborhood association meeting to discuss the plan, traffic issues, and et cetera. I thought it was a well-attended meeting.
was.
Councilor Hensley was there, as was Councilor Coleman. Did you attend? No. But it was, really great to see what they're talking about doing, but definitely some of the traffic pieces that are a concern for that part of the Riverside neighborhood and the North Woods. Let's see, on a URD front, just some great successes for the URD. We celebrated the grand reopening or dedication of the Legion Hall on last night, for Taco Tuesday, and saw their new entrance and whatnot. And we also got a very, I think it was a great conversation about what the Legion does in our community. And our Legion here in Canby is one of the biggest ones in the country. And they do a tremendous amount for our community, so it was just a very moving piece to hear what they do. They had the local commander as well as the regional and state legionnaires, so it was really great. On Saturday the 16th, the new Friends of the Library bookstore grand opening is going to be coming up. There will be music, I think a ribbon cutting of some kind, and treats, I suppose, knowing the library. It'll be a fun time, so if you can come out and make that, that'd be great. There is also a ribbon cutting for the new Canby Center location on November 14th. We just did a new ribbon cutting for Davies Clinic, so there's a lot of great business stuff going on in Canby, so it's good to hear. I have nothing to report on C4 because they meet tomorrow. We haven't met in 2 months, so I'll report on that on next month. And we'll start with Councilor Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nothing really new with Canby Fire, except they have hired ESCI for their consulting services, and they'll start looking at efficiencies within the department and how they can lower their overall operational costs. So that's really the only thing I'd report on that. On another note, I had an opportunity to play around in golf at Willamette Valley Country Club, and I got teamed up with the board president, Ralph, and great guy, and he was explaining to us everything they've done with the golf course. And one particular thing they've done is they've done an irrigation system to drain all the water down to the lowest point. And they're reclaiming that water, and which is really pretty cool. But they've also been featured on a show called The Green Economy. And the episode was titled The Greening of the Golf Industry, and focused on new techniques that the golf industry is using to lower its impact on the environment, lower the use of power and natural resources, while at the same time maintaining a well-kept golf environment. The leaps in technology over the last 20 years in the golf industry have been very progressive, but not well known to the average golfer. The show was taped last month. It aired on Fox 49. It's scheduled to run at the beginning of the rainy season, as the reclamation system also increases the playability of the course. The show will likely air again in the next few months, and the country club is likely to post edited versions on their website. I just thought that was a really great thing that nobody really talks about that they've done down there.
That's great.
And that's all I have.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It has been a while since we've been here. Let's see. I attended the Taste of the Seasons event at Cuts Forest, which is always a well-attended event. I think we saw about everybody in town that we know. Although I did get called on by a couple of citizens that there was no quorum notice for that. I think it was in jest. So we just made sure that no more than 2 of us were in one place at one time. I also attended the spectacular parade and trick-or-treating with my family. That's always a good time, as well as the chamber luncheon yesterday. As Mr. Mayor noted, I did attend as liaison to the Riverside Neighborhood Association, the Phase 2 Northwoods Development meeting, and myself and the chair of the Neighborhood Association was very pleased with the turnout, and wanted to extend thanks to Kurt McLeod for putting that together and informing the citizens on what the plans are and giving them a venue to air their concerns and questions. Main Street Promotions Committee, we met today at 4:30, so I've been in this building for a long time today. We are planning the Light Up the Night event for December 6th. 6 p.m. will be the parade again this year, 6:30 the tree lighting. Doing something a little new this year, we're going to have an opportunity for businesses to decorate trees and have the community vote on them by way of placing canned food under their trees. So kind of a way to collect the food for the Kiwanis and involve the citizens in coming in, checking out all the trees and different businesses. If you're a business and interested in getting a tree to decorate and be part of that, get a hold of Jamie Stickle. Also, if you want to be part of the parade or any other aspect of that event, get a hold of Jamie down in the Economic Development Building. She'll be glad to put you to work. And also, the Canby School Board will be meeting tomorrow evening at 6:30. Their work session's normally in the Meridian Room, but it is not going to be there tomorrow. It'll be at the Omni Room at the high school, where they'll be talking about the Canby Advanced Manufacturing Metals and Machine Summit, as well as continued discussion regarding technology and digital curriculum. And there'll also be a program status for an update on the TROS DLI program. Many other things, but those were kind of the highlights that I saw on the agenda. I will not be able to attend that, as I will be at the C4 meeting. On the community announcements, the Canby American Legion Auxiliary Community Breakfast is this Sunday, November 10th from 8 a.m. to 11:30. Thought I would make sure I let you know. There's always good eats. You can choose from bacon, chicken, fried steak, sausage, ham, but also get pancakes, hash browns, eggs, coffee, juice, all for $6 for adults, $3 for kids, and free for veterans because they're appreciating the veterans this weekend. So with that, that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I get to do, well, thank you. I get to do Counselor Coleman's, since he is not here this evening. He wanted to let us all know that he did attend the Blue Heron Mill in Oregon City. They did a tour and talking about, he did mention that he was there with Counselor Hensley looking at the potential of what that property is going to hopefully become somewhere down the road in terms of tourism and whatnot, and how that could impact Canby, which I think is very well will. The Traffic Safety Committee meeting is researching an application on how we can gain authority to reduce speed limits in some of our some areas of our community where we think it's needed. And that he also attended the Northwoods development by the developers, Kurt McLeod and friends in that part of town, and that he will give us an update on the library monthly meeting next time around, because that's next week. So that's Councilor Coleman.
Alrighty, Mr. Mayor, likewise, I attended the Taste of the Season and American Legion's reopening. I was really impressed with the American Legion. I had no idea the tremendous amount of time and effort and dollars they pour into the youth of our community. Huge, huge supporters of the Boy Scouts and the Boys and Girls State program, in which, was it 300 and some boys and girls from around the state of Oregon attended Salem, and they do they're literally assigned a virtual city, and they govern it and move on up to the county and then the state, and then they hold the national election. It's, I don't want to say non-political. They're not Republicans and Democrats. They are the Beavers and the Ducks. I don't know if you can get more partisan than that. And I don't know who won this year. But they asked us to spread the word about just how incredibly much they do care about our youth, the leaders of tomorrow, and how much they work with them. It's quite an education. No Cub report, since Cub did not meet in late October. And I'd like to close with extending my congratulations to Joni Brockman for getting her very new, beautiful, and spacious Allegro Studios opened up. It's a marvelous facility. It's really great to see the kids have the room they need and to be in Canby now instead of Barlow. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Councilor Park.
I didn't know I got credit for going to Taste of the Seasons. I thought that was just a lot of good food, but yes. And Tim, you took a little bit of my thunder there with Joni Brockman moving her Allegro Dance Studio into town. That's terrific. It looks beautiful. 2nd Avenue, it's another enhancement. I guess what I can add to that is that the local contractor, Darren Monin, did that. And I guess for full disclosure, we have 3 counselors that have daughters that dance.
Helped build that.
Dance, invested in that, so yes. The American Legion, already been mentioned, but what I wanted to mention as the liaison to the Main Street program is that in part is a matching grant from the Main Street program. And in addition to the charitable efforts, I just think the American Legion agreeing to do that facade change has really changed the face of that block. And thank you for doing that. Bike Ped Committee continues to refine its proposed bicycle maps. And on the Main Street, again, back to the Main Street, the Halloween efforts that went on this year, so pleased with the numbers. And later, in the middle of that, I was down at Thriftway, down at Cusforth's, buying some more candy, and two moms were talking. And they were doing trick-or-treating at the different stations there inside Cusforth's itself. And one said to the other, "Have you been downtown and seen what's there?" And said, "No, what?" And you know, we'll get close to the point where people will say it's Main Street, but it said, "No, the city is doing something." So the city was recognized by two moms as having done something, and I think as we move along, more and more these type of, I don't want to say controlled environments, but family-friendly, safe environments where they can get out into the community and have the businesses support it, I think are a real safe alternative to my childhood. So.
Councilor
Mr.
Ryder.
Mayor, I'd like to report for the Canby Area Transit. They normally meet in the City Hall on the third Thursday of the month, but for some reason, they decided that they were going to go somewhere else on that night, and they wound up down on Sequoia Parkway at their new headquarters. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to be there that night, but I was able to go the next day and take a tour, and it's just really a wonderful facility and a lot of room for all the people compared to what they had here on 2nd Avenue. And so we can really be proud of what they've been able to accomplish and be able to move a lot of their vehicles down around the area in front of their building, and then they take off from there to start the day for transportation for Canby and local area. Also, it was my privilege on the same day that morning to be able to go to the team track. I think it was their first preliminary meeting with some of the representatives that are being contracted with a grant from the state to be able to look into a rail transportation center, possibly located on property just behind Fred Meyer's, and I think it's 10 to 14 acres, something like that. And I walked down, went around that area, and it just looks like it would be a great area for being able for our industries to be able to transport their finished products and possibly bring in raw material. And so that was really a very important meeting, and looking forward to future meetings.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to thank Ken for attending that. That team track is a real game changer, and appreciate you being on top of that.
Yeah, that's going to be a big deal for Canby. Absolutely.
Mr. Ryder also makes a good point about Kat's facility. I didn't mention because I knew you were the liaison and figured you'd have a report, but I also went by Kat yesterday and talked with Julie and took a tour of the new facility, and they've done a very good job. And they did a wonderful job of repurposing some furniture that the police department left behind. So they have a very cozy little place that they're got lots of room, and they're very happy there. So I wanted to congratulate them on their new digs.
Thank you all. So the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I ask for approval of the consent agenda, which includes the minutes of October 10th, 2013 of the City Council special meeting, and approval of the minutes of the October 16th, 2013 City Council work session and regular meetings.
Thank you, sir. I'll take a second, please.
Second.
So, motion made by Council President Dale, and I'll give it to Councilor Rocha this time, to approve the consent agenda, which includes the minutes of the October 10th, 2013 City Council special meeting, and the approval of the minutes of the October 16th, 2013 City Council work session and regular meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
And anyone opposed? Passes 6-0. Moving into resolutions and ordinances.
The first item we have is ordinance 1386. This is amending Canby Municipal Code, Chapter 5.06, regarding the regulation of secondhand dealers. This is before you for second reading and will require a roll call vote.
Thank you, Kim. So just as a recap, so this is ordinance that was worked on by city staff and with the police chief to address, potential needs or issues that would arise with specifically the pawn shop type stores that, we have one in town, and they are set a fantastic example of what it should look like and how it should be done. So we just put in some extra pieces into place to make sure that if there are others, that they meet that same high bar that they have set. Am I leaving anything out, Joe?
No.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So I will take a motion to accept this.
Mr. Mayor, I
Thank you.
move for approval of ordinance number 1386, an ordinance adding Canby Municipal Code CMC Chapter 5.06 regarding the regulation of secondhand dealers in the city of Canby.
Second.
Motion made by Councilor Dale, seconded by Councilor Hensley to approve ordinance 1386, amending Canby Municipal Code Chapter 5.06 regarding the regulation of secondhand dealers. Roll call vote.
Councilor Rocha?
Yes.
Councilor Hensley?
Yes.
Councilor Dale?
Aye.
Councilor Parker?
Yes.
Councilor Ryder?
Yes.
Passes 5-0. Thank you.
The next item we have is ordinance 1387. This is amending Canby Municipal Code, Chapter 12.36, regarding telecommunications facilities.
With that, I will turn that over to you, Joe.
Fair enough. Okay, so we've had a couple of recent workshops on this, so the subject isn't terribly new to the council, although new to the public, potentially. Workshops are open to the public, but not always do people watch as they do the television. This is an attempt to just slightly alter what exists already, which is the telecommunication facilities chapter of our code, chapter 12.36. And what it does is it looks to incorporate some of these best practices and recommended changes that were put forth by both the League of Oregon Cities and a law firm that deals exclusively in these, or not exclusively in these matters, but a lot in these matters, Barry Elsner. And so we were looking at and working through in these workshops about 4 areas to consider. One of them was trying to encapsulate language that might include wireless folks into our telecommunications franchise and whether or not they should be regulated. And the answer that I got, the direction that I got, was that the language should not. And so it does not. Next, as a change, was this idea of there's a couple of ways to regulate folks in town. One of them would be looking at franchises. When somebody either is in the city rights-of-way or uses what is in the city rights-of-way. And then there's a different idea, which is if you're just for the privilege of doing business in town, you can also be regulated. And so there's a newer idea injected into this, which is called an annual registration fee. And that is simply, it's disassociated actually with the rights-of-way. It's more to do with the privilege of doing business in town. And what I was given direction to do was have that in place as a potential regulation that might give us some stability to revenue streams if definitions change in what can be taxed, basically. So not necessarily have it be an additional tax, but just have it be something that could potentially stabilize revenue streams in the future. And so the other portion of having a registration fee was to then have it basically give a tax break against the registration fee for whatever franchise fees were already paid by any given franchisee in the city, a telecommunications franchisee. And so I'll put this a little differently maybe because people won't understand what I said the first time. And I learned this from teaching, right? I say it about 3 different ways, hopefully, and people will get it, because there's different types of learners out there. But if we're going to have this privilege, this idea of the privilege of doing business in town as a way of maybe accounting for revenues if definitions change or if technologies change, we can have that in place, but we can also credit whatever people pay for being in the right-of-way so that they don't double pay. And so that's where the council landed in giving me direction was, I was hearing that you guys wanted for me to say, yes, let's have this in place, theoretically, but then let's make sure that whatever money, dollar for dollar, if you pay to be in the right-of-way, you don't also pay for the privilege of being in town doing business. And so that's what we've looked to do. And then finally, there was a provision that we just didn't have in here, which would automatically, as a right-of-way use fee, if you're in town and you're using the rights-of-way, but you're not, you haven't gotten a franchise yet, and for whatever reason you're not following the ordinance, which says you're supposed to, then automatically you're going to owe a certain percentage, just like everybody else, and then you'd still be subject to potential penalties for not following the telecommunications ordinance. But what that would allow you to do is start owing for as much time as you've been, operating outside of the ordinance, basically. And so those 4 things we've accomplished within this document without changing too much. And this is my recommendation, basically, is to go forward with these changes that show up in red, and the change, and basically annihilating the things that have been crossed out.
So, again, a number of work sessions for us on this piece, as well as input from a number of people here in the audience have been sent, I think, to you, Joe, on the matter. But this does the job of leveling the playing fields.
That is the hope. There is basically an edict in telecommunications law that says you have to have a level playing field. There's also a few areas that, frankly, statutorily in Oregon law, treat incumbent folks, which are people who are here and in the ground and have facilities here, slightly differently by definitions of what can be taxed from competitive folks who just kind of come and use the facilities to go ahead and reach out and find customers. Okay. And so there's potential changes coming down the road, but what we can't do is look in a crystal ball and know exactly what those changes will be. And the idea was we wanted to get kind of on the books to do some of these best practices or better practices, as it were, for what currently is the law. The other thing is, and I know there's been some concern with different folks about, whether or not this sort of skeleton level of document says enough or not enough in terms of specificity when there's other rules out there, federal rules, state rules and such. I mean, there is a total obligation on a city's part to follow what is known as the supremacy clause, which says, we got to follow federal rules and state rules too. And so we're not dodging those. And in fact, we're just primarily trying to figure out how to, best regulate the folks who are in our town doing business here and in the ground, because we are charged with controlling our rights-of-way for the public, for patrolling them, and for basically repairing them if anything happens.
Any questions for Joe? Yes, sir.
Joe, could you summarize, again for us and for the audience, everybody cares about the money. So tonight, remind us what money we're dealing with, and in particular what we're not dealing with.
Tonight is, it really is more about the skeleton document or the policy. You are instituting the registration, annual registration fee idea, which says there will be a registration fee for the privilege of doing business in this town, disassociated from the rights of way franchise idea. But we don't know what that number is yet because you have not set it.
Right.
And whatever number that is, you'll get a credit for whatever you pay on your franchise against that, so that you won't get double paid or have to do the double pay. But once again, we don't know what that will be. What this does is it says we're going to set these things by a resolution, and when you set fees by resolution, there's opportunity for a public hearing, and so that will be unearthed at a later date, a couple weeks down the road. For now, we're just saying, as a policy matter, we're going to have this registration fee now as part of our skeleton ordinance, and we're going to set these franchise rates in an even fashion down the road by resolution as well, so there'll be an opportunity for a public hearing on the amounts.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions at all? I do have a couple of the yellow cards on this issue. Roger, would you like to? Okay. Paul, yeah.
May I state my name for the record? My name is Paul Hauer. I'm president of Canby Telecom here in Canby. And thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for allowing me to just give a few brief thoughts. And I appreciate the hard work that was done on the ordinance. I know it's difficult to try to encapsulate everything that you want to encapsulate. Our concerns may be the unintended consequences that that we'll have to deal with later. And my feeling is the ordinance is really the groundwork for those fees to come later, which I understand. So the concern of Canby Telecom is the competitive disadvantage that could arise from some of these unintended consequences. And year to year, as wireless proliferates, it obviously has an impact on Canby's revenue streams and customers and things like that. There's nothing wrong with competition. I understand that. What Canby and a lot of incumbent telephone companies have, or telecommunication companies have, is what's called carrier of last resort. So when a customer comes to town, the incumbent local exchange carrier, Canby Telecom, is required to serve that customer regardless of the cost. And so there's embedded costs in an incumbent carrier that aren't necessarily there for the competitors to come in and pick off the cream of the crop. So again, the term level playing field is probably a little overused. We want to make sure that everybody is holding up their end of the bargain and paying for the proper fees. And understandably, there are fees that need to go into the management of these rights-of-ways. We obviously have a tremendous amount of facilities there. Canby invests a significant amount of money in fiber optics and electronic equipment to provide the services to its customers, as well as some of the companies that come in and build cell towers. A lot of people have a misconception that wireless is strictly wireless. It's wireless from the phone to the tower, but then it hits the wire center or the fiber optics. And so as wireless proliferates, more and more fiber is required to go into the ground. And so being at one of the workshops, there was a comment made, at some point, we're going to be wireless anyway, and so what are we worried about all this orange cord going in the ground? Well, the more wireless there is, the more orange cord that has to go in the ground, because it requires that much more capacity. So, back to the ordinance a little bit more specifically, the concern is the breadth of the services that will have the fees applied to for the franchise fees. You know, we've talked about state and federal laws, and specifically a concern of Canby's is internet services. They're covered under the state and federal statutes, and so, you know, as was addressed, is not really a huge concern, but something to be mindful of as we go forward. Again, applying the franchise fees or rights-of-way fees to the companies that are providing the service, but there are companies that buy services, say from Canby Telephone. So a provider may come in and pick off a big company. They don't have the facilities, so they may buy capacity from Canby Telephone. So it's making sure that Canby doesn't get taxed, as well as the person who's actually providing the retail of that service. And then, you know, just tracking the transiting service providers. I'm not sure how that, you know, can happen. I don't know if it's tied to construction permits or whatever, but you know, those people are in the ground as well. And then services that are being provided by entities that maybe have received federal grants, who their main focus are anchor institutions. You know, those anchor institutions can be customers in the past, but because of the flexibility that a provider would have, because they don't have the cost themselves, that they were granted the funds to build those facilities, you know, those again take away from the revenues of a Canby Telecom, and could have impact on those franchise fees that Canby pays. So it's making sure we pick up those providers as well. So just to summarize, you know, it's recognized that this ordinance is an important ordinance. We just want to make sure that everything is dealt with, that there are no unintended consequences. You know, if the fees go up for Canby, we've got to figure out some way to do business quicker and smarter and more efficiently, and we certainly want to continue to not only invest in the facilities that we have, but all the programs that we currently support in the community. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Paul. Would you like to go now, Roger?
Thank you. Roger Wright, 273 North Grand Street, Canby, on behalf of Canby Telephone. I expect to be very brief, I really do. At the last workshop, the mayor and the council suggested that we send in emails about specific concerns that we might have. And I had 3. And I spent quite a bit of time just trying to narrow the issues down to what the concerns were so that we could get them. I heard Attorney speak, Joe, on one of the 3, so I'd like to just talk about those very distinctly. If you have my email and kept it, you might have it. Number 1, we'd like to know the answer, yes or no, whether internet is included. And that's very, very important to us. I stated in my email that it defines telecommunications services, and then they specifically listed 6 things, and they had statutes. And it doesn't say, and in my opinion, anything about internet, but then it talks on page 11 about other federal laws and applicable laws. And you know, that's pretty general, guys, and I'd really like to know when I go out of here, yes or no. If it's yes, we have an objection. If it's no, may I please suggest that you state it under those 7 exceptions and put the statute number ORS 305.822 and the Internet Tax Freedom Act. There is a lack of knowledge as we continue on. We forget what has happened. And I think let's be specific and get it straight what we mean, because as we get replaced, I'm no longer practicing law, different council persons, different attorneys, different administrators, what did this group mean when they passed this in 2013? I'd ask that you carefully consider that. The second point is, Joe did a very good job. He explained the skeleton, and I understand that. Our position is, it's nice to have the skeleton, but we're vitally concerned about the heart and lungs. And that's what makes us go. That's where we pump the blood and the livelihood. So my suggestion, which I thought was an okay one to consider, is may we please have the ordinance with the resolution so that it can be discussed. The level playing field is over, but that's where we've been consistent. We'd like to see that. That was just behind number 2. Number 3 was one that excluded from this ordinance telecommunication providers that are owned and operated, and it does say exclusively for its own use, by state or political subdivisions. For the life of me, our position is, and I'm trying to think about, why should we exclude them and require it of everybody else? To me, this is on like a smaller scale of the big thing. Congress says we're not going to be Obamacare because that's too complicated, and you know we need to be excluded from that. Well, our position is that they should not be excluded. They should be under the same things. If you disagree with me, may I respectfully suggest that you consider the sentence that I added in my memo that states, for the record I do it, if state or public subdivisions should be an exception, then it's respectfully requested that another sentence be added which states, state or political subdivisions which transfer, assign, lease, sublease, wholesale, or retail telecommunication services, and the recipient of such services shall be subject to an annual registration fee. I think that's clarifying it. You know, if you think there should be an exception, I disagree respectfully, then let's say, okay, let's make sure that what that exception is for, and if you step over the boundary, starting to do what the private people do, then you should pay a registration fee too. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Roger. Don, give me 1 second here.
If you have a question as this, what I find a little bit interesting about this is none of the language that's being complained about is a change to the current ordinance. So, I mean, this is, I guess, a moment for, they've been operating with a franchise under the current ordinance. Mm-hmm. This is an opportunity perhaps for him to receive more language that he wants, but we don't have to put Internet Freedom Act in there because it exists and it controls, but say it sunsets in 2014. Then you have to go back and change and say no more Internet Freedom Act, as opposed to just allowing the language subject to all state and federal laws, which does the exact same operative business without saying specific laws so that you'd have to go back and remove them later. And so that's what we're doing. But as far as the 6 things that are excluded?
Hold on, Joe.
Okay.
So can we go point 1?
Okay.
So speak to me like I am not an expert on the Internet Freedom Act.
Yes.
And what it is that Roger's calling out, because I am not.
Federal
So-
government does not allow the Internet to be taxed.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And so we can't tax it.
So the short answer to his question, is internet included? The answer is no.
Correct. And it's always been that way. Or not always, but I mean, because of the advent of the Internet. Yeah, and you had a question?
Yeah,
Mr.
sure.
Yeah.
What's the scope then of the Internet Freedom Act? Does that pertain to all IP services?
Well, and
What, you see what I'm poking at? What does internet mean?
yeah, there's some gray in there. I mean, we'd have to go to the codified federal rule and tease it out.
I mean, the particular thing I'm thinking about is, are all IP-based services offered by a telco provider exempt from our taxation?
No. I mean, it becomes a fight sometimes around some of the edges of what, people have traditionally, I guess, been hauled into court to find out what the absolute definition is. I think the answer is, without having the case law right in front of me, is whether or not it acts much more like the traditional, cable services or the traditional telephone services versus, the information available, at the World Wide Web.
Okay. Because in the end, that's a pretty huge financial issue. It's one thing if our interpretation is we cannot tax WAVE and CTA, for instance, on what we would get on our bills as our internet package, my 1010 package. However, if that was to be extended to all IP-based services, then virtually everything is going over the fiber now and can be argued to be an IP-based service. So then television and my phone would also not be taxable. And I know that's been a concern of the telcos, is where's the fence?
Well, and that answer would be with the courts.
Okay. It's undefined today.
Not totally undefined, I don't know what the absolute definition is, but I'm saying it's been treated more as, the closer it gets to the traditional services that are currently taxable, I think the more that the courts say, well, of course. And I can research and get you the exact answer if you would like.
Well, it's not me in particular, I think, that's after the answer. It's going to be our telcos that are affected. And I'm learning here in telco law that there is a lot of you do what you can and see what gets challenged in court. I'm not suggesting that we push hard and see. It's just that there's a lot that's not defined. And even this week, Verizon's challenging internet freedom, right, in a DC court. That's a big, big deal as to whether you can charge for private internet. So I'm just poking at the gravity of the question, Mr. Mayor.
No, I get you.
Do we really understand our sandbox?
Well, probably not. I mean, it's going to be up to a higher court than us to define these things. And it's going to be up to litigants to pay a whole bunch of money to get into court and then climb up the ladder. So, I mean, as far as our concern is, we do our best to have a groundwork of ordinance so that we can be in a position to regulate our rights of way the best we know how under current definitions.
And as our attorney, you're feeling confident that our language is appropriate, that whatever gets decided at higher levels, we're okay, we're covered. We're not going back and amending.
Yeah, well,
our
and if it
ordinances
changes too much, then you change with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are we addressing that issue then, Roger?
Well, I don't think so, but I do respect the council. I don't think that we're addressing it because, to me, it's not very credible to say, well, we may have to amend our ordinance in the future. We're amending ordinances all the time. So if the intent is not to be internet, let's just say it. And I think that when you're opening up an ordinance, why don't you clean it up? I mean, let's clean it up. What do we meant? If there's an issue out there with the telcos, and it's a simple thing saying no, that's what I hear. Well, then let's say no there.
Okay. We'll come back to that, I guess. Joe, so point two, Roger brought up there the ordinance with the resolution piece. Right, I think that was point two. I'm sorry, Roger, what were the concerns there?
Well, my point was, let's have the resolution the same night that we enact the ordinance so that we know what the heart and the lungs are doing,
What the fees will
as
be.
opposed to just a skeleton. Just like when there's a building project, the council wants to know, well, wait a second, what are we gonna spend? And instead of saying, we're gonna do this, well, we gotta know what it's gonna spend. That's kind of the way we are. We wanna know what we're being obligated to do.
Okay. Greg, you look like you have something to...
No, I'm just talking to Joe. We talked about that. This requires 2 readings. obviously, and I think we're looking at the possibility of having that resolution at the second reading
Okay.
before it's enacted, so that's taken care of if that's the case.
Well, but I would also reiterate that anytime that you set fees, you get a public hearing. And so this isn't, he will have an opportunity when you have those separate issues. I mean, part of this is, do you climb in and open up 20 issues at once, or do you climb in and open 4 and get through the first 4, call it the skeleton, and then you go to the heart and lungs 2 weeks from now? And so 2 weeks from now, we will do heart and lungs.
Sound like surgeons up here. And then, so explain point 3 that you was talking about, the subdivision there on the state and political piece.
Yeah.
And the 7 points, you were starting to get into that.
Oh, yeah, well, part of this is, you know, our telecommunications facilities followed very closely the model ordinance of, 2 years prior to this. And so the language itself has, except for the 4 areas that I mentioned, remains. And so we've been operating under this language. And so the 6 exceptions that he wanted a 7th listed, those have existed all along, and he's had a franchise under that. And so it's a little mystifying to me to come and say that, I'm demanding this sort of change because it's a big problem, when it hasn't been a problem all along. Nobody's come up, they've existed under it with a franchise all along, and yet now they want that particular change like it's some sort of problem, like we're changing it today, because we're not. It's the same as always.
Mr. Mayor? Yes, sir.
So if I understand what Roger's saying, is that if you have an exempted entity, a government, say the county, that has fiber optic running through town, and they were to subcontract it with a commercial provider, and they were to make a lot of money, would the exemption follow to the contractor who is making a lot of money?
No. And not only that, it wouldn't follow to the county, because the county would be making money it wouldn't be just serving itself. I mean, the exemption really is about a government entity that serves for its own purpose, just simply itself. Like if it created a network of reaching out to its own fairgrounds, and then it connected with its own, Oregon City sites, that would be a network. It wouldn't even be charging itself anything. There would be no revenue being earned in order to tax. Plus, we wouldn't necessarily want to be taxing that anyway. So, I mean, that's the exemption, is if there's a state or municipality or whatever that's just serving itself, then that's what becomes exempt. When it starts serving other folks and there's revenues being made, or when it starts selling off to other folks, then that's them making revenue off of it, and therefore it can be taxed. That's my understanding of it. And I believe that's the understanding that we have even with the county under what they suppose will be their franchise agreement.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we weren't going to a situation where any of the competitors of commercial franchises could hop into competition for using the county's fiber optic and enjoy
Exemption.
exemption.
No. I mean, that is not
Okay.
what should occur under this.
But could it?
No.
And if they would fall under the penalties if they were to operate in that manner without the registration fees.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so we're not giving an exception to a government entity
So-
that we wouldn't give the private sector. It is even.
The
For
only-
the purposes of generating revenue.
The exception was simply for a government entity that only served itself.
Only serves itself.
Once it starts having other people on, its line, or starts even selling to other people outside of itself, then it's different. It's not serving itself anymore, and those folks using it aren't the entity. They're just using the infrastructure.
Okay. I'm done there.
Yes, sir.
So, just to make that concrete, later tonight on Ordinance 1388, which is Clackamas County's franchise agreement, Section 11 specifically states a franchise fee, correct? Of 7% of gross revenues.
Yes.
So that is also a tripwire. If they start making money, they resell to Comcast, they do whatever, the franchise fee kicks in?
Correct.
Okay.
So so the internet piece, do we need it? I mean, it's, as you're stating it, Joe, no, we don't tax the internet.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing is that Roger wants that, I guess, added in there for the record that that's being stated, either for, posterity's sake or 10 years down the road when it's a different group of people up here. Is that,
Well, I think it's unnecessary. And,
redundant.
yeah, because if we're subject to state and federal law, then whenever that changes, we just keep operating under those, the supremacy clause, basically.
any other questions on this before I ask?
I should say this, too. If, in law, obviously, there's a lot of arguments. And one of the arguments might be definition. And which definition are you using, right? Are you using the federal definition of internet if you put it in here and it's a city thing? Or is there a city definition of it? What you end up having to do is say, well, now we're going to have to add more. We're going to have to add, we go by the federal definition if we want to just limit it to that. Because if we want to give them maybe a new argument, it's like, well, maybe the state definition's a little stricter, or maybe the city definition's a little stricter, or it changes, right? And then what you end up doing is potentially litigating around the edges of all these things, as opposed to just saying, let's just leave it as a cleaner, more skeleton-type document.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Peterson.
I'd like to reserve my time.
Okay, sir. We'll come back to you. All right. Any other, well, I guess we'll take move into taking a motion on ordinance 1387.
Now, is this supposed to be first reading?
This is first.
This is the first reading
First
for that,
reading.
yes.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, I move that we adopt ordinance 1387, amending the Canby Municipal Code, Chapter 12.36, regarding telecommunication facilities.
All right. Motion made by Councilor Ryder. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, sir. Motion's been made by Councilor Ryder, second by Councilor Parker, to approve ordinance 1387, amending Canby Municipal Code, Chapter 12.36, regarding telecommunications facilities. Any discussion? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you all. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, the next item we have is ordinance 1388. This is granting to Clackamas County a non-exclusive franchise to construct, operate, and maintain a telecommunications network and provide telecommunications services within the city of Canby.
Okay.
Now, this was actually familiar to the council in that it had been here before, and this was something that we were milling over ahead of some of these changes that we knew were coming down the pike to the telecommunications ordinance. And so council had kind of tabled it so that they could first consider some of these other changes and what they might be and kind of refine some of the issues. But very technically, these, and I'll talk basically about 1388 and 1389, they are not only similar to themselves, but they're extraordinarily similar to a franchise agreement that we gave to Lightspeed Networks about 3 months prior to this first coming in front of the council back in, I think, March. So you talk about the level playing field and such, but I mean, these are franchise agreements that, you have to have a franchise agreement in order to be in the ground, even under our current ordinance, and the one that potentially could come up for second reading and pass also requires the same thing. And these look to incorporate the code, and even look to incorporate, potential changes in the code even down the road. But what they do is they set the rate at the highest under law right now, which is 7%. And so it's something that both of these people realized we did to the person right, or the franchisee right before, and they're willing to do that. They're competitive carriers, and so we set the rate at 7% for them, and they're willing to accept it. And I would offer to the council that it's a good deal for the city.